What is going on, everyone? Welcome on back to the All Aussie Rules Footy Podcast. How are we all going today? This is episode number 20. This is the round 8 preview. Round 8, sort of rivalry round. Very good lineup of matches coming up this weekend. So we'll get into them shortly. First up, we'll have a look at the latest news. We'll have a look at my power rankings after round 7. We'll do the round 8 preview of all 9 matches. And we'll finish off with my tips for round 8. Before we jump into all of that, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment on all of this. Check out my socials. Got Twitter, got Instagram, got TikTok. Go check them all out. And yeah, if you want my thoughts after each match instantly, I upload a TikTok basically straight away. I'm trying to tweet during all the matches, so yeah, check me out on all of them. Yeah, before we'll jump into the latest news. Yeah, Jack Higgins didn't get off his 3-week suspension. No real surprise there. It would have been a bit of a miracle if he had of. Even bigger news though, Rose apparently is fine to play tomorrow night. Are Port Adelaide bluffing? I don't know. Bloke went off with a hammy on last Friday, and now apparently he's good to play this weekend. So we'll see. I mean, it's obviously just a strain. Mustn't have been a very much of a strain. They certainly wouldn't want him to go out there and then actually do his hammy. So they must be confident that he's going to be okay. So yeah, he's playing. Obviously, it's Wednesday when I'm recording this, so the only teams we have are the Adelaide and Port Adelaide ones. Nothing too exciting from either team, I don't think. Out of Port Adelaide's team go Aaliyah with concussion, and Sam Pepper with a knee. And then Adelaide. Oh, and in they get Ryan Burton and McEntee, and for Adelaide they lose Hamill, Borlase, both omitted, and Luke Pedler with a shoulder. In comes Curtin, Butts, and a B. Smith. So yeah, that's all we've got in terms of teams going for this weekend so far. Other than Collingwood have also announced that DeGoey and Tom Mitchell will not be playing. Both different injuries. Tom Mitchell has a foot, and DeGoey, I think, was a quad maybe. So they're not going to be in this week. However, they will be debuting Lockie Sullivan, so good luck to him. He's playing his first game of AFL after 6 years in the VFL and been very dominant in the VFL for years. So it will be interesting to see how he goes. That's about all I have in terms of news. So we will jump straight into my power rankings after round 7, going into round 8. And here it is. As always, we'll start at the bottom, work our way towards the top. At the bottom, no real surprise here, North Melbourne. They've been 18th for the last couple of weeks, and as it currently stands, I can't see a world where they get out of 18th. Yeah, I just don't know. They're clearly the worst team at the moment. And yeah, that's where they're going to stay for a little bit based on what I've seen so far. 17th Hawthorn, they're not much better. They just, I don't know, another team that doesn't bring enough pressure. The old adage of bruise-free football kind of looks like what they play a little bit, but who am I to judge sitting in my room watching TV? But, you know, they haven't shown much. Their only win obviously being over North Melbourne. West Coast, they were solid again, so not good enough to jump Richmond yet, I don't think, in the power rankings, but they're very close to them. If they were to manage to knock off the Bombers this week, that would be huge for them. Obviously, tough game over there, but you never know. We'll see how they go. Richmond, they've shown very little. They did beat Sydney somehow. That was, like a month ago now, so can't still be living on that, but that is why they stay above West Coast. Adelaide, they they did what they needed to last week. They got a win, but I can't move them up based on beating North Melbourne. That's something that every team should be achieving quite easily, is a win over North Melbourne based on what we've seen so far. St Kilda, they've dropped down a spot down to 13th. I don't know, they're struggling at the moment. They're 2 and 5. They need to turn their season around. They get the opportunity this weekend to do that. They have the game against North Melbourne, so just like Adelaide, they need to go out and win this by a considerable margin, I think. Gold Coast, they were good on the weekend. They beat West Coast up on the Gold Coast, so they jump above St Kilda into 12. Are they capable of moving up a bit higher? Yeah, probably, but I need to start seeing them beat some good teams before I consider that a real option. If they to go to the Gabba and beat Brisbane this weekend, that would be a good start. Like, obviously Brisbane aren't going great, but it would be a positive for them. Brisbane, they've dropped a couple spots. I don't know what's going on with Brisbane there. A lot of their numbers are still good. They just, going forward, struggle for some reason. It's been their issue all year, and it's kind of continued. They have other issues as well, but that's one of their major issues. So, yeah, they've dropped a couple spots. Bulldogs, they've gone up a spot. They're sitting in 10th. They've been very good. They only just went down to Freo over there last week in what was a good game for both teams. Quite enjoyable game to watch. So they're 10th. Bombers, they're coming off the bye. It wasn't a bye. It was a draw against Collingwood on Anzac Day. Great performance from them. They're sitting 9th, and to be honest, they could be pushing into the 8. If they go over and beat West Coast, they probably move into the 8 this week, depending on other results. In power rankings, I mean, they're obviously already in the 8, seeing the 4.5 wins from 7 games. So they're flying along, they're doing well. Fremantle, they got the win last week. They did everything they needed to. They stay 8th. Slightly moved up a little bit closer towards Collingwood, so these two teams are probably very even. Collingwood obviously drew with Essendon. Bit of a disappointing result, and they've got a very tough game this week against Carlton, who will be very keen to get the W this week. 6 is Melbourne. I don't know what to make of Melbourne yet. 2 weeks before the bye, I thought they were one of the top 4 teams in the competition. The week before the bye, they were pretty terrible. And then they've come out of the bye, and yeah, they beat Richmond, but the first half was very sloppy, and it was a little bit tired during the second half, but it wasn't enough to convince me completely. But I can still see them jumping back up, and they've got an absolute cracking game this weekend against Geelong, so if they knock off Geelong, then yeah, they'll be back into the top 4. Port Adelaide, they dropped a spot down to 5th, mainly because Sydney's flying. But yeah, I don't know. Probably a bit harsher on Port Adelaide to drop them a spot when they beat St Kilda, but they didn't beat St Kilda by as much as they should have. And yeah, could they go above Carlton? Maybe. I think Carlton and Port Adelaide are very similar at the moment. However, though, Port Adelaide did lose quite convincingly to Collingwood 2 weeks ago, so it's kind of a whiplash from that. Carlton, they suffered their second loss in 3 games. They're going to be very keen to get out there and turn that around this weekend. They're sitting 4th. Sydney, they jumped back up into the top 3. They jumped 2 spots. They they only played Hawthorn, but they've barely put a foot wrong. You take out that Richmond loss, which was now like a month ago, and they've been very, very good. So, yeah, I've got them 3rd, and by the end of this weekend, they could be 1 or 2, depending on if they win and Geelong lose. Maybe they do go up to number 1. Number 2 is Geelong, undefeated. Maybe they should be number 1. I still think GWS are a better team. GWS's only loss obviously coming to Carlton down in Melbourne, so certainly not one that's a bad result, and GWS sitting number 1. So I think top 3 teams are the top 3 teams. maybe not in that order, but they're, in my opinion, they are. I think those three are clearly the best three teams at the moment. I think the next three are probably the next three best teams: Carlton, Port Adelaide, Melbourne. Those six you'd think aren't missing finals, and then the last two spots in the finals, they may be higher on the ladder. Like, you never know, Collingwood or Fremantle might end up fifth, sixth, maybe even top four, depending on results for the rest of the year. But I think there's going to be Collingwood, Fremantle, Essendon, Bulldogs, and either Brisbane or Gold Coast fighting for those last two spots in finals, the way I see it at the moment. So that's power rankings after round 7. We will now jump into our round 8 previews. We start on, I was going to say Wednesday night. It's definitely Thursday night. Over in Adelaide, it's showdown. Rivalry round is here. Almost rivalry round. It's not quite fully rivalry round because for some reason the AFL just didn't want to give us a full rivalry round, but they've gone close. And to be honest, the only thing they should have probably done different in terms of actual teams matched up is put West Coast and Fremantle, which was 2 weeks ago this week, and then that would have allowed Essendon and Richmond to play each other. So I think that would have been the perfect scenario across the board, really. Probably would have given us some very high crowd figures too, for a lot of big games at the G, but for whatever reason they didn't give that to us. Another thing I think they should have done is they've absolutely dropped the ball by putting Sydney GWS game at 1:45 on Saturday. I think this should have been the 4:35 game. They've been pushing that as their marquee Saturday afternoon time slot, and that should have been where they were. They shouldn't be sitting on the 1:45 game on the traditional Saturday afternoon time slot. Saturday night footy is great. Melbourne Geelong. Imagine if we could have had Sydney GWS straight into Melbourne Geelong. Would have been the perfect scenario for AFL and for people watching football. But I digress. We'll now actually properly look at this game. Adelaide, Port Adelaide. Adelaide 12, Port Adelaide 5th on the ladder. So clearly you would expect Port Adelaide to be the favourites going into this. They have the better record at 5-2. They have a lot better offense. Defenses are very similar for both teams. But based on what we've seen, you'd have to say Port Adelaide would go in overwhelming favourites, but it's the showdown. Adelaide have shown slight improvement over the last 3 or 4 weeks, so I can't fully write them off in this game. I still think Port Adelaide will win, but certainly not writing Adelaide off. Last year, as in pretty much every year, they did play each other twice, and last year Adelaide got them both, won both times. So that's a sign of where this is at. Port Adelaide were a top 4 team last year in the home and away season, and still lost Adelaide twice, who didn't make the finals. Granted, Adelaide probably should have made the finals, but they didn't. So that's a sign of what this match can kind of throw up. The year before, in 2022, Port Adelaide did win one of the two. The second one, 2021, was won both by Port. So if you go the last 3 years, they're 3-3. However, Adelaide did get the last 2. And Taylor Walker kicked 7 last year in the second meeting between these two teams. Where does Adelaide win this? I think the main thing that they need to look at is probably their tackle differential, their pressure, and their forward efficiency. They're the main areas that they lack, I think, especially compared to Port Adelaide. As you can see, their tackle differential is -7 per game, which is quite bad. It's like 4th worst in the AFL, whereas Port Adelaide are the number 1 team. So this is a game that you would expect Adelaide will come out pretty hot and pushing the pressure, but they definitely need to do that more than just this one game. So I think Port Adelaide are just the better rounded team, to be honest, based on what we've seen. It'll be interesting to see if Rose does play. Um, but their midfield is just really good. Obviously, Adelaide's midfield is starting to get going. Dawson's been good the last couple of weeks. He's been best on ground 2 weeks ago, and then probably second best on ground last week. Rory Laird was huge last week. I think Adelaide are going to probably be relying on their big name forwards to really have a big game. Obviously, Port's tall defence has got better since last year. So we'll see if Tex can get away, but they might be relying on some of those smaller ones like Rankin and stuff to kick 3 or 4 goals each to really get themselves into this game. Second game up is Carlton hosting Collingwood at the MCG on Friday night. Massive game for both teams. Carlton have lost 2 of the last 3. Collingwood have obviously gone 3.5 wins from their last 4 games to turn their season back around. Everyone's still not overly confident with Collingwood, and probably rightly so. They haven't been perfect. But it certainly builds this game up as a massive game for both teams. Last year was 2 times these 2 teams played. Round 20, Carlton won. I was going to say convincingly. They were, outside of the first 5 minutes, probably the better team for most of the day, and they did win by 17 points. The previous time they played last year was round 10, so similar-ish time to right now, and Collingwood got that one by 28 points. 2022, Collingwood won both of those games, both of them by less than a kick. One of them, Jamie Elliott kicked a goal late in the last minute to break Carlton's finals chances and to put Collingwood in the top 4. And the other one they won by less than a kick as well, which was a topsy-turvy day all day. So Collingwood have won 3 of the last 4. However, 2 of them were by less than a kick. So going by recent history, you'd say probably going to be a close game. Carlton will go in favourites, obviously being the better record and the more consistent team from this year. They've really turned their season around in terms of their clearances and stuff since Walsh has come back into the team. He's been huge for them the last 3 weeks. Paddy Cripps is playing outstanding football, and I think 3 weeks ago they were like 16th in the league in clearances, and they've moved that up to 9th already, just based on 3 solid weeks in the midfield. Collingwood's biggest issue, especially last week, but across the season kind of, is their clearances. So that's probably a spot where Carlton will really look to push their dominance. Both teams tackle very well, so that will be probably play a major role. Whoever tackles the better will probably almost go close to winning this. Collingwood rely a lot on forcing turnovers and trying to do that more forward this year than last year, I think, is what I've seen. So they're trying to do that, and maybe that will turn that, if they can get that going really well, then maybe there's still a chance this season. But yeah, I'd expect Carlton to go in. They are going to go in favourites, and look, they should win this. They'll be pretty fired up to win it, and Collingwood will be too, but they've lost to Goey and Mitchell, who, granted, neither of them are in the greatest form of their lives, but they're still 2 big losses. I would imagine, we know Sullivan's coming in. I would imagine probably Finn McRae coming in as well, because he's been huge in the VFL the last 3 weeks, so I'd imagine we'll probably see him back. But yeah, Carlton should win this, but nothing would surprise me that both teams will come in wanting this, and it will be a high pressure, probably a lot of turnovers game, and it will just be who capitalises on mistakes from the other team, I think. Next up is Saturday afternoon, what should be one of the games of the round. I mean, there's a lot of good games this weekend. It's rivalry round, but the battle for the bridge. Not that I don't know if they're really trying to publicise it as the battle of the bridge anymore, but I'm still going to call it that. Sydney v GWS. Both teams flying. Both teams 6-1. Second and third on the ladder. This is huge for the AFL. Both Sydney-based teams, both flying, and I think clearly in the top 4 teams in the AFL. As I said before, I think they're both in the top 3. As you can see, both averaging over 100 points a game, both conceding in the 70s against. Sydney slightly better in the defensive side of things. Across the board, though, they're just both very good teams. The one thing GWS kind of struggle with is their clearance game, but it doesn't really matter because they just overwhelm you with around the rest of the ground, and like their midfield's very good, as is Sydney's midfield. So I think this will be probably the main highlight of the match. Will be the midfields going at each other. GWS obviously, Green, Kelly, both flying along. Whitfield's been great. Caniglio has also been good, getting lots of the ball. And then how that stacks up against the Sydney ball winners of Goulden, Heaney, Warner, Brodie Grundy. So I think this will be an absolute cracking game. Recent history between these two sides. They play each other 2 times a year as well, obviously. Last year, they split them. Funnily enough, they won the away game. Whoever was the away team won the game. So Sydney won at NG Stadium, and GWS won at SCG. So this game last year was round 7, so same time at the SCG. GWS won by a point in what was one of the better games of the year, 107 to 106, and then Sydney got their revenge in round 21, winning 95 to 86. 2022 at the SCG, Sydney won that one by a massive margin, absolutely smashed them. And in round 1, they played each other as well, and Sydney won that one as well. Obviously, that was the year Sydney went on to the grand final and lost, so they were probably the better team that year. 2021, they played each other 3 times. That was COVID-affected year, so some of the games were in different places. Round 5, Sydney lost to GWS by 2 points at the SCG. Round 18, they played up on the Gold Coast, and Sydney won that one by 26 points. And then they played each other in the elimination final down in Launceston, and that was an absolute thriller that kind of looked like it wasn't going to be, and then it was. GWS won that by a point. So they kind of split their games across the years. Who goes into this as the expected winner? Sydney are slight favourites according to the bookmakers. I personally, I probably think Sydney are too. They just have so much depth in their team. Like Parker was huge last week in the VFL, and he's to come back into this team, and you kind of wonder where he's going to go in, because across the board they're just very, very good team. So yeah, I'll be looking towards Sydney as my pick in this, just because I think they're slightly more consistent across the board, but at the same time GWS are a very good team and they have a lot of good players. So I don't know, could go either way. I haven't really given you much to be confident about, because it should be an absolute cracking game. I think game of the round right there, Saturday afternoon, 1:45. Make sure you watch it. It should be great entertainment. 4th game of the week is not going to be game of the round. I shouldn't say it's not. Very unlikely to be game of the round. St Kilda versus North Melbourne at Marvel Stadium. This is a time slot that I like watching football, and I mean I will watch it, but St Kilda, North Melbourne, 14th versus 18th. Both teams struggling. They've got one win in the last 5 weeks each between them. One week win between them. So North obviously 0-5, St Kilda 1-4 in the last 5 weeks. And if you take out the round 2 win for St Kilda against Collingwood, their season has been very ordinary. Because their other win was against Richmond when they gave them a 40-point head start, and yeah, they did come back and win. But she's been a tough time for them. They're going to go in massive favourites, as you would expect. Like North Melbourne are conceding 123 points a game. Like a defence that's conceding that many points is not going to win many. They do score okay, but that's mainly just because they don't miss when they're in front of goal. Like 59.68% accuracy. That's not 100% true, because I am going to kind of tidy up the accuracy stat this week, but that's just goals and behinds. I'm going to turn that into goals from shots, but that's, yeah, they'll be fixed up before next week's episode. But their forward efficiency, their ability to create shots from their forward 50 entries is the worst in the league, and they are also worst in the league at getting it inside 50. So that combination suggests that they are very, very bad. Like, if you're the worst at getting it in the 50 and then the worst at turning those inside 50s into shots, you're going to have a tough time. Can they turn it around? Yeah, sure, maybe, but I can't see it happening anytime soon. They just, yeah, for a team that's been down and struggling for so long, it is kind of tough to see, but at the moment it's rough times. And to be honest, this is kind of what St Kilda need, is just they need to come out against a team and just get a dominant win. And at the moment, from what we've seen of St Kilda the last month, there's not many teams that they could do that against. So to come up against North Melbourne here is perfect timing for them, and maybe this will be able to get their season back into gear, because otherwise they could be in trouble. And looking ahead, they also have Hawthorn in round 9, so if they can get a couple cheap wins over the next 2 weeks, and then they play Fremantle in Melbourne, so there's no reason that they can't win their next 3 quite comfortably, possibly. All of a sudden their confidence is back, they're up and about, they're 5-5 after 10 weeks, and all of a sudden their season's looking alright again. However, if they lose any of the next couple, you're going to have to be asking questions about their season again. But they'll go in heavy favourites, and I can't see any reason why you'd want to tip North Melbourne, because you're probably just setting yourself up for a lot of heartbreak in this one. Saturday night football, we have Melbourne v Geelong at the MCG. 4th versus 1st. This should be an absolute cracker. Geelong at the MCG again. They showed last week that they're fine at the G, and look, you kind of expect that they probably will be again. Melbourne's best is definitely good enough to win this. We just haven't consistently seen their best this year. Yes, they're 5-2, but they've had a couple stinkers. Both losses were ones that they probably should have won. And a couple of their wins have not been outstanding, but they're wins in the end. So 5-2, they've had a solid start, and if they can knock off Geelong here, then their season is really, really going well. Geelong, they just keep getting it done. As you can see, they don't lead any stat categories, but they're just very good at everything. Outside of clearances, they're very good at everything. They score well, they defend well, they kick a goal well, they convert well, they slightly win inside 50s each week. Their disposal efficiency is pretty bad, but that's a stat that you can kind of discount a little bit, because they have had that game in the wet 2 weeks ago, which really lowered that. So they're probably not actually 17th. They're slightly better than that if you take out that one game. And they tackle well, so they're just getting it done week in, week out. They'll go in favourites. MCG probably, I won't say helps Melbourne. Melbourne are better at the MCG than they are elsewhere. Geelong are probably similar at most grounds, in my opinion. So, going by that, Melbourne here are more likely to win at the MCG than they would be if it was at Marvel Stadium or at definitely at Cardinia Park or just any random stadium. I think I'll be tipping Geelong, but it's one I could see an upset happening here. I don't know. I think Melbourne were pretty average last week, but they played Wednesday night, so they've played one game in 20 odd days. Going into this, they should be pitch perfect, ready to go, and we'll see. They might be a bit lackluster. That could always happen when you've only played one game in 20 days, but I think at this time of season it should have them cherry ripe for this one. I'll probably still tip Geelong, but I'm not going to be confident in that tip at all. The other Saturday night game is the resurgent West Coast Eagles versus the Bombers, who are going along at a great level at the moment. Flying along. 3 wins and a draw from their last 5 games. They obviously had one loss, which was a really bad result over in Adelaide against Port Adelaide, but that's not the worst thing of all time. Over at Optus probably brings West Coast into this. A month ago, Essendon would have been looking at this one as one they have to win. Obviously, West Coast last month, they played well against Sydney, then they beat Richmond and Fremantle, and they were solid against Gold Coast last week over on the Gold Coast. So all of a sudden, this game definitely looks a lot harder for the Bombers. If Bombers will go in favourites and quite heavy favourites, is that convincing us that they will win? Probably not. I think the Bombers are the better team, but it's always tough game at Optus Stadium for any Melbourne team. Like, over the years, not many teams go over and win. Obviously, last couple of years against West Coast has been slightly different because the Eagles just have not been competitive the last 2 seasons. However, they are a lot better this year. So we'll see what happens. I think Essendon should win. Across the board, they're the better team. Their forward line's better. Their defenders are better. Their ball movement's better. Their midfield's better. You take out Elliot Yeo, and West Coast would be in a world of hurt. He's been absolutely carrying their midfield. Yes, there's been Harley Reid, who's been great, and other players in their midfield that have also been up and down, been good enough, but Elliot Yeo's consistency is carrying that midfield, in my opinion. And Waterman up front has been super. He's kicked 15 goals in the last 3 weeks, and he's only a couple goals off leading the Coleman. So he's absolutely flying, and I hope for his sake he continues that, because he's fun to watch and he's good in front of goal. Hard to see Essendon not going in as favourites, and probably should be. They're the better team, but stranger things have happened, and West Coast, as I said, are in the best form they've been in since 2019, I think. So don't write them off, is basically what I'm saying. We go on to the Sunday games. The first one on Sunday is Richmond Fremantle at the MCG. If Fremantle ever needed a win in Melbourne, this is probably it. Yeah, they got the win last week just to kind of turn their season around a little bit in terms of before that they had been struggling for 3 weeks, hadn't won, but then they won, so that kind of turned their season around back into the positives again. They started the season absolutely blistering. They're the best clearance team in the league, which doesn't really surprise anyone when you got Sarong Fife in there. They are both absolute guns, and it's hard to see Richmond being able to stop that because they are the worst clearance team in the league. So you're the best and the worst. You'd think Fremantle were just going to have an absolute field day with that, I would imagine. They are, yeah. You'd just looking at that number, you'd think it's going to be a very tough day. Richmond obviously have been struggling with keeping people in the park all year, and Fremantle are back in form. So I think based on what we've seen this year, you'd expect Fremantle going in as favourites. Probably not as big a favourites as I think they should. Even though it's in Melbourne, I think they should be probably 40-point favourites in this, because what we've seen from Richmond this year is not great. You take out their win against Sydney and 0-6, and they have not shown much since about round 2 or 3, in my opinion. But strange things happen when they're at the G. They did beat Sydney at the G, obviously, so at the G against an interstate team, it's not impossible for them to win this. But yeah, I'll certainly be looking at Fremantle to win this one. It's the first time since 2018 that these two teams have met each other at the MCG. So what's that, like 6 years? That's a long time. Richmond absolutely dominated that game, won by 80 points. However, 2017, when they played each other at the G, Fremantle did win that one. You look at last year, they played at Optus Stadium and Richmond won it. And then the year before they played at Marvel Stadium and it was a draw. So maybe it ends up being a close game. The last 3 games have been 15 points, a draw, and 4 points. So they've played some pretty close games. I just can't see a world where the best clearance team in the game doesn't absolutely destroy the worst clearance team in the game. The fact that, Fremantle dominate clearances so much but don't get it inside 50 more than their opposition is quite crazy to me, but football's weird in some ways, and that is one of them. Game number 8 of the weekend, Bulldogs Hawthorn. This one is at Marvel Stadium. Probably, like a couple of the others, not going to be game of the round. Hawthorn have shown me nothing to get excited about. Bulldogs, meanwhile, their last 2 weeks have been good. They obviously lost to Fremantle last week over there, but they didn't lose any followers. They were pretty solid throughout. They got the job done in the week before in convincing style over St Kilda, so it's hard to go against Bulldogs. Marvel Stadium, I think, is perfect for them as well. They're the 6th highest scoring team against the worst scoring team, and Bulldogs defence has actually been pretty solid this year too, so based on what we've seen, they should go in as favourites. They are going to go in as favourites, probably about 40-point favourites, roughly. Just across the board, they pretty much win every stat category compared to Hawthorn. And even though they struggle at clearances, Hawthorn struggle at clearances more. What we've seen from the Hawks isn't great. I know Sam Mitchell's said after the game last week, if you didn't have a scoreboard, you would have said, Hawthorn looked like they were having a crack. I'm not convinced, to be honest. How you can have so much less of the ball every week and still have 14 less tackles every single game, it just blows my mind. Like, it doesn't make sense to me, like, that you're allowing teams just to have so much uncontested footy. But that's what they're doing, and they're obviously not as talented as a lot of other teams, but in my opinion, they should be pushing that pressure up, because that's one thing that doesn't matter whether you've got the best players in the league or not. You can always have that pressure, and I'd love to see Hawthorn up that over the coming weeks, because as it stands, I don't think they're bringing enough. So yes, Bulldogs all day, every day. If we get the Bulldogs of 3 weeks ago, the one that played against Essendon, maybe Hawthorn have a chance, but I find it very hard to see that happening. They are the most inconsistent team, but surely not in this one. That leaves us with one more game for the round. Brisbane, Gold Coast at the Gabba, 7-10 on Sunday night. So a bit of a late one on Sunday. Not completely against the late Sunday night game. Would I rather it be a little bit earlier? Yeah, probably, but that's okay. Brisbane go in favourites, which I guess is just based on the fact that people still don't fully trust or believe what Brisbane have been doing this year is the real Brisbane. They've shown snippets that they're still one of the best teams in the league. You look at their first quarter against Carlton. You look at their first half last week. It wasn't great, but it was solid. They've put together like little snippets where you're like, yep, they are good enough to be in the top 4 teams. And then for 3/4 of every game, they just don't look like an AFL team for some reason, and I don't quite understand it. Their efficiency going forward is obviously their biggest downfall, because they get the ball forward a lot, and they have good forwards like Charlie Cameron and Joey Danaher, for starters, should be having a field day. If you're getting plus 10 inside 50s per game, you're getting that many opportunities. Those forwards should be having like outstanding seasons, and yet they're really struggling to get a score on the board. And it kind of doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, but I guess that's football, isn't it? Like, yeah, I don't know. I'd expect from what we've seen, without scoreboards, I would say Brisbane are in the top 3 teams, top 4 at least at the moment. But the scoreboard is a major thing, and they just keep losing. So they're 2-5. Gold Coast, on the other hand, they're chugging along. They're doing what they need to. As I've said, I want to see them beat a good team before I'm convinced that they are a good team. Their 4 wins have been on the Gold Coast against all bottom 6 or 7 teams on the ladder at the moment. So their 4 wins have been against Richmond, who are 16th, Hawthorn, who are 17th, West Coast, who are 15th, and Adelaide, who are 12th. So all 4 of their wins so far have been teams that are below them on the ladder, and have all been when Gold Coast are at home. So while they are getting the job done, and that's all you can do, really, I'm not convinced that they are good enough to be a top 8 team yet. I think they're going to be on the brink of the finals. I just don't see them doing it. And from what we've seen, that's just my opinion. They could go out this week, smack Brisbane all around the park, and get the win, which would be huge for them. And then obviously the following week they go back to Gold Coast. Oh no, they don't. Sorry, they go to Darwin. But they play North Melbourne. So if they win against Brisbane and then they play against North Melbourne, all of a sudden they could be 6-3 after 9 weeks, and still not beat a team above them. So, or even in the 8, or close to the 8, which is a crazy stat. A big challenge for them will come round 10 though, when they host Geelong at Darwin. That'll be a big game. Thursday night fixture for them coming up. That's exciting times for the Gold Coast Suns. So yeah, that's the 9 games. That's how I see them. We'll have a look at my tips now for the round, just to finish off this episode. Here they are. As you can see, 44 of 63. We went 8 of 9 last weekend. We had a pretty solid week. At the moment, obviously, this is Wednesday. I might change my tips. I won't change them for the podcast, obviously, or what I post, I don't reckon, but I could potentially change them in my actual tipping competitions, just due to the fact that it is Wednesday at the moment, and first game isn't for another 24 hours, and then the next game's 24 hours after that, and then a lot can happen in those couple of days to make me change my tips. However, Port Adelaide to beat Adelaide in the showdown, not confident. I think they're the better team, so I'm going to tip them. That's the only reason. Showdown could go either way, and quite often the lower ranked team does win the showdown, so it would not surprise me Adelaide winning, but just based on the fact that Port Adelaide are the better team, I'm going to tip them. Same Carlton, Collingwood. Carlton are the better team at the moment, and for that reason I'm going to tip them. I would expect this will be a high energy, high pressure game, and I don't know. I think Carlton will win it, in my opinion, but we'll see. Sydney GWS, as I said, I think Sydney are just slightly better. They're across the field. I think the top level for both teams is very, very high. I just think Sydney consistency through their depth is a bit better than GWS. Their depth chart is insane up on in Sydney, so I'm going with them just because their 23 is probably better than GWS's 23, whereas the top 5 to 10 are probably very similar. St Kilda v North Melbourne. There's no way could I tip North Melbourne. They will eventually win a game, and I hope it's this week. I really do, for North Melbourne, hope that they win this week. I just can't see it happening based on what we've seen. So yes, I'll be going St Kilda quite comfortably in that one. Melbourne Geelong, as I said, Geelong just keep getting it done, so I'm going to back them just based on that. Like, don't jump off them. They're not doing anything wrong. They keep getting over the line. But if there was an upset, I would not be surprised with this one. Melbourne are a team that kind of show their best some weeks and don't show their best the next. Trying to pick when their best is and when their worst is hard. There's a lot of theories going around that maybe it's when it's a little bit damp or dewy, they struggle a little bit, so maybe if it's a completely dry Saturday night, they might be alright, but we'll see what happens in that one. I'll still be tipping Geelong. West Coast, Essendon, over in the West. I'm going to go Essendon by 15. I'm not confident, as I've said before. If West Coast is to win this, they need their midfield to dominate. Elliot Yeo will play very well. You just can put that one in the books. He just always is very good. I think they need a little bit more from Kelly, and I think they need a little bit. Well, they'll need a big game from Harley Reid. They don't need more from him. He's been great, but they need him to be very good. And yeah, that's what they just need to do. Their midfield needs to play well. But I'm going to go Essendon at the moment, and I don't think I'll change my tip, but you never know. Richmond Fremantle, I can't go Richmond based on what we've seen recently. Fremantle are the better team, and even though it's in Melbourne, I'm still confident enough that they'll get the job done. Western Bulldogs, Hawthorn. Bulldogs comfortably. If Bulldogs are even halfway to their best in this game, they win this by 7 goals. If they're at their best, they could win by 100. And that's not an exaggeration. They literally, if they are at their best, they will win this by 100 points. That is how much better than they are than Hawthorn. Final game of the round, Brisbane Gold Coast. I went Brisbane just because I'm not convinced about Gold Coast. I just went through it. They might come out and win this and make me look silly, which I'll take. I still think Brisbane are a great team. They just have a couple issues that are just costing them big time. Like, they could quite easily have won opening round against Carlton, and they just went down. All of a sudden, they win that, and their season's turned around. Round one, they weren't great, but they only lost by 23 points over in the West against Fremantle, so it's not terrible. They obviously were pretty ordinary last week against GWS. They lost to Collingwood, who aren't flying. They obviously easily beat North Melbourne, but we won't really count that as a game. And they beat Melbourne in Melbourne. So if that team turns up, there's no way Gold Coast get close to them, in my opinion. But that's football. That's my 9 tips. That's how I see it. It's a tough week. It's a really good week of football. As I said, it's basically rivalry week. I wish the AFL had fully invested into rivalry round and just made a big deal of this. I think it would have been awesome for the game, because Port Adelaide, the showdown, massive rivals. Carlton, Collingwood, 2 of the oldest rivals in the book. Sydney, GWS, the battle for the bridge, massive rivals. St Kilda, North Melbourne, I don't know if they're massive rivals, but I don't know who either of them are rivals with, to be honest. Melbourne, Geelong, not huge, but are kind of rivals. West Coast, Essendon are not. So that's the bloody West Coast teams should have been playing each other. And then you could add Richmond, Essendon, and it would have been huge. Bulldogs, Hawthorn, probably rivals. And then Brisbane, Gold Coast, the battle. The Q clash, as they call it, to round off the weekend, would have been superb. What are they doing in AFL HQ? Imagine if we had... You could have moved the St Kilda North Melbourne game to Sunday. You could have had Richmond Essendon Saturday night and had Melbourne Geelong straight before that at 4:35. And it would have been the best weekend of football ever. It would have been so good. But I'm not an AFL scheduler, and I'm sure they have their reasons. But I'm just rambling now. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying my content and want to see more. Comment, let me know what you think of my tips, of what I've said, or let me know who you think your favourite player is, and I'll give you a thumbs up. I appreciate you for tuning in. Don't forget to check me out on Twitter, Instagram, and whatever else. TikTok is the other one. Check me out on all them. I appreciate you for tuning in, and I'll catch us on the next one.